Today we're going to talk about the best countries to incorporate offshore. Whether you've got an online company, you sell through e-commerce, you sell information products, you sell consulting, maybe you just have a holding company for your investments, and that's something people should consider as well in many cases. I'm going to walk you through the process that I go through when I look at how to incorporate and where to do it, and I'm going to give you a new simple test that you can use to apply whenever you're moving your business overseas. So first of all, let me explain this simple process that you can consider when it comes to how you want to look at your corporate taxation versus your personal taxation. Because remember, tax-friendly quadrant, we've talked about it for years, I invented it. You have to be taxed somewhere and your company has to be taxed somewhere. You might be used to those two places being the same, but they certainly don't have to be. And so what I've recommended for many, but not all folks, is that you want to keep the company as tax neutral as possible. This is especially good for Americans who are qualifying under the foreign earned income exclusion. Americans think they can't reduce their taxes overseas because of citizenship-based taxation, but if you are an entrepreneur, if you have an active business, you can go to a tax neutral jurisdiction, and if you set up your personal taxes properly, you can reduce your tax rate to anywhere between 0 and about 10% on the whole. If you're not an American, you can reduce it to as little as 0%. And so what I prefer to avoid in many cases is you go somewhere and they charge you some rate of tax, because often if you're incorporating overseas, they want your money going through their banks. They want the fees of kind of the registered agents and the lawyers. That's how they make money. If you look at a Belize or a British Virgin Islands or a Nevis, they've got teeny tiny populations. They want that $100 or $200 that comes through for the annual renewal fee, and they want business for people on the island to process that. That's why they were willing to accept zero tax. And sometimes those islands have banks that you can do your business on, although that often isn't the case anymore. So you look at some of the tax-friendly jurisdictions that allow you to not pay. You have a place like Hong Kong, where if you're there in Hong Kong, if you're a resident, if you have employees, if you have customers, you're going to pay tax. But there are ways to exempt yourself from that. There's some systems over the years that have been like that in the Caribbean. They're not zero anymore, but they're close to it. You've got some of the more traditional tax havens like the British Virgin Islands. You've got Belize. You've got places that are further flung, like Vanuatu and the Marshall Islands. Some of these don't have great reputations. I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. You know, the UAE was on the list for the free zones. For most businesses now, of the kind that we work with, it's not. If you're a global shipping magnate, it could be. If you run a holding company, it could be. But the UAE is not necessarily on the list anymore. Some of the other Gulf states actually do have corporate taxes or are bringing them in, even though they're tax-free personally. So the bottom line is find a place where your company can live in a jurisdiction that just wants people to have companies there. And if that can be as tax neutral as possible, that allows you to scale up your tax on the personal side. And so let's say you have a company in the British Virgin Islands, and I'm going to tell you again what the process is for where that should be in a minute. But you have a company there, and you go through some economic substance paperwork, whatever, zero tax. But then you choose to live somewhere where there is some tax obligation. Maybe it's a non-dom system, or if you remit money to the country, then you pay tax on that at the income tax rate. So you live in Malta, you send yourself 100,000 euros to live, but your British Virgin Island company makes €1 million. You're paying tax on 10% of your income. So you're kind of choosing that piece. You might pay a lump sum. You go to Italy, you go to Switzerland, you pay a certain amount of tax every year, make as much as you want overseas. It's cool. You may go to a country like a Uruguay, which has a tax exemption, a territorial tax country like a Malaysia or a Panama or a Georgia. Countries, there's any number of different ways to dramatically reduce a tax on the personal side. But maybe those countries, maybe they tax you 4%, maybe they tax you 10%, maybe they tax you on a certain percentage of your income. Again, if it's a lump sum, you get to scale it up and down. Now, as long as the country that you're living in doesn't have the country that you are doing business in on some kind of blacklist, like Portugal, which used to have the NHR tax system. I said it was kind of the Swiss cheese of tax incentives, because you were always going to have to pay something at the corporate level because all the tax havens were blacklisted. So like in Italy, for example, was always a better situation unless you were making like in the 6 figures. If you were making in the 7 figures, Italy's lump sum was always a better deal, because it was not only was it cheaper, but there was just less paperwork to do. There was less back and forth and tax memoranda and all that kind of stuff of going from Portugal to Malta or Bulgaria or moving the money around. That was more complicated. So if the place that you're doing business is not on a blacklist, then it's generally easier to say put the company in the most tax neutral jurisdiction possible, and then decide how much personal tax I want to pay. So if your company's in a tax neutral jurisdiction and then you want to go and live in a territorial, maybe you pay tax on your salary, maybe you don't, tax-free country, there's some of those. you can basically pay 0 and 0. That's the tax-friendly quadrant, as long as you've checked out personally of where you're from and as long as your company has moved, obviously, overseas. That's the tax-friendly quadrant we talk about. However, I don't think you have to pay 0. Nothing wrong with saying, I want to live in Europe. I'm going to pay Greece or Italy 50,000 or 100,000 euros flat. I'm going to live in Switzerland and I'll pay them whatever it is. There's actually ways that if you're a European citizen, you can reduce the tax you pay in Switzerland. So if you're not a European citizen and you want to live in Switzerland, it might be worthwhile to get a European passport first. You'll get an ROI on that. But hey, I want to live in Ireland. Okay, non-dom regime. You figure out what that is, you're going to pay something. And you're willing to pay that something, but you're not complicating things by paying in 2 places. There are plenty of jurisdictions that want your business. Where you don't want to follow that is if you're setting up a company kind of for the purpose of getting immigration. I think a lot of people set up companies in the UAE free zone over the years because they just thought, okay, this is the future. Hong Kong's moving a little more towards China. UAE seems like centrally located, and I get a residence permit. If you're in that camp, I told you, we've made episodes on the truth about Dubai's new 9% tax. If you were in that camp where, hey, seems like a good place to place my corporate flag, probably isn't anymore, and you probably want to move your company out of there. If you love living in Dubai and it's worth 9%, or Abu Dhabi or anywhere else you want to live, then fine. Set up. To me, really, most people should not be setting up companies in the UAE anymore unless it is to facilitate moving to the UAE, which, by the way, even then, you can buy real estate, which if you're going to buy your own house, you might be able to get the golden visa that way. And by the way, that said, just because your company's offshore doesn't mean the UAE's new permanent establishment rules won't kick in. You still might be paying the 9%. So the bottom line is, if you want to move to the UAE, if you want to move to Dubai, then that might be the best place to have your company. If you want to move to the Cayman Islands, that might be the best place to move your company. And there's some other places that allow you to do that. Not all of them are that tax friendly. Obviously, there's plenty of countries that have high taxes. If you go there and hire 1 or 2 people, you get a residence permit. That could be a play for citizenship. So in Ireland, for example, historically Estonia, places like that. So generally my idea is separate where you live in the company unless they happen to facilitate each other. The Canary Islands, for example, is one. No one should have a Canary Islands company, or Madeira, Portugal. For me, those facilitate. I want to live there. I want to take advantage of a lower tax regime, and I'm willing to pay something to live there. That's good. If you want to move to the Canary Islands, you will not see me setting up a company in the Canary Islands, right? Even Labuan in Malaysia. I love Malaysia. They now have 3% flat tax on everything. That's still going to come with more paperwork. I'd rather have the paperwork in terms of reporting my profits fall only on me and only if it's required. If I live in a non-dom country, I may not be required to report what happens in that foreign corporation. So it's not just lowering your taxes. I don't believe you should always have to pay 0 in tax. If living in a place that serves you requires some tax, pay some tax. I don't think anywhere in the world, once you're making decent money, it's with 50%. If you make 50 grand, sure. Right? You're not paying 50% at 50 grand. If you're making millions and tens of millions of dollars, there's nowhere on earth that you're getting your money's worth for 50%. Go and visit, live somewhere else. And that's what we help our clients do at Nomad Capitalist. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. If you're making even $500,000 a year or more, and we've helped people move to 31 different tax-friendly countries, and 1 or 2 not very tax-friendly countries just because their wife was from there or something and they really wanted to go. Nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We can help you figure this out. I'm going to come back to the important points here in a minute. But it's not just tax, it's also bureaucracy, it's also reporting. And if you can just streamline that more into your personal name and keep the corporate side clean, obviously you're going to see a place like the UAE that's not only going to introduce a tax rate, but they're also going to introduce more paperwork requirements. That's the kind of stuff you want to be aware of. So let's talk about where to incorporate. We just put together, I think, a very comprehensive report. Our tax and R&D people just put together basically every offshore jurisdiction in the world. We included some like Switzerland and Singapore, which can be tax friendly for certain kinds of people, mainly more for passive investors who aren't doing stuff in those jurisdictions. And so what we try to figure out is what kind of company would work for what kind of people. We would try to create avatars because there was a time when I said, yeah, Marshall Islands company, it's trash, nobody wants it, reputation's in the toilet. Yes, register your yacht there, but don't have a company. Then we met someone who had a very kind of specific crypto holding company, and they were in the Marshall Islands. And he's like, oh, it works perfectly. We get all the exchanges. It's fantastic. Yeah, that's not a bad, sure. In the crypto world, where jurisdiction doesn't necessarily matter, just where's your flag planted, that could work. If you're trying to open a brokerage account with a reputable broker, they're probably not going to take a Marshall Islands company. That's too high risk to them. Panama could be too high risk to them, but they'll take the British Virgin Islands, for example. So the British Virgin Islands could be good for like a holding company if you own a bunch of stocks. What a lot of people don't realize is if you're not a U.S. person and you own U.S. stocks or other U.S. cited assets, you want to structure those generally offshore if you want to avoid high estate taxes. And we've helped people. We sent a guy to the tax professional not that long ago. He's going to save millions. It cost him like 10 grand to make some changes. It's saving millions at death. So the British Virgin Islands could be good for a holding company, but it's not going to be as good as if you need all the online buy now, pay later kind of payments, and you need PayPal. I think they do have PayPal down there now, but it's going to be a higher fee. Like, it's just not going to offer you as many services. British Virgin Islands companies can get banks. We actually just went through and probably talked about 50 banks, and probably 20 to 30 of them can accept British Virgin Islands companies for certain kinds of customers, or if you have enough money, including in some pretty reputable jurisdictions all the way up to Switzerland. But you're going to be putting a lot more money in the bank. If you don't want to put $3 million in the bank, maybe just incorporate the company in a little bit more reputable jurisdiction. So Hong Kong, some people like it, some people don't. For an active business, you have a lot of services. You have a lot of banks that are happy to take you on in a way that, for example, the UAE, UAE free zones, relatively difficult to bank around the world compared to Hong Kong or even BVI. Again, if you don't need a bank, if you're just holding property, for example, you could go to the Marshall Islands. We talked to someone recently about holding property. They said, hey, I have it in Belize because it's like one of the lightest weight reporting requirements. I don't have to satisfy a bank. I already take care of the tax obligations on the property, so just keep it lightweight. BVI, Belize, two of the lightest weight companies. Seychelles used to be lightweight, not so much anymore. New requirements coming into force. So paperwork, again, is an issue you want to keep in mind, not just tax rate. So the more active businesses want more active jurisdictions. Holding companies should be probably somewhere in the middle. I would generally avoid a Belize or a Vanuatu or a Panama, except for specific situations. But again, if you're in cryptocurrency or something, if you're just holding property, that could work. But what you want to know is, what can I get access to for like payments? Now, we had people who are affiliate marketers, and they get payments from 4 different people that they affiliate with. They sell stuff online, and they get 100 grand a month from this guy, 300 grand a month from this guy, and they're like, this company would send money anywhere. They don't care. Okay, well then, could you go to Belize? Sure. The question then is, where's a Belize company going to get a bank account? I think we have one bank in Switzerland that for like $5 million for the average person will open you an account. It's a lot of KYC. But sure, okay, if you want to put $5 million in. If you don't, where are you going to bank with a Belize company? $1 million over here, $500,000 over there. Just talk to some folks at one of the banks we work with in Singapore. We don't take Belize companies anymore. Please don't send anyone from Belize. We don't want them. So, like, where the money's coming from, how many payments you have, do you know the customers? Are they flexible with you? Right? I mean, for our business, we want to be in jurisdictions. We actually have a U.S. bank account for one of our offshore companies. It's doable. Most U.S. banks won't do that. We did that. And so, but they weren't going to do it for a Marshall Islands company. They weren't going to do it for a Bahamas company. But they would do it because the bank has some presence in one of the markets where we have some business, and they were willing to do that. We've got a good relationship with. And so that helps because we have Americans where it's easier to send money within the U.S. And then we can get the money to the U.S. and we can move it where we want it. And so these are the kinds of things that you want to consider. Generally speaking, if you're an active business, I want to be in a more active jurisdiction that has some kind of reputation. Nothing wrong with Labuan. Some of the tax treaties, like with Australia, they cut out Labuan. Some people think they're getting a treaty benefit, and they're not. But Labuan just isn't that well known. The risk profile is kind of weird. You're kind of going to be limited to like banks in that part of the world, which may not be the worst thing. So I'm looking for kind of well-known jurisdictions. I think a Hong Kong isn't terrible at the top. Some people need to be doing business in Europe. Obviously, you've got places like Malta and Bulgaria. For more passive holding companies, people who can get money from anywhere, people who are willing to set up multi-part structures. Let's say you're already in the U.S., you have some kind of U.S. structure, you can combine with an offshore structure. BVI could work. And then again, if you're just holding property, doing crypto, doing stuff like that, a Belize, something like that, Panama might work. But you want to understand what the restrictions are for where you're living and what, if any, companies they blacklist. So I think like Turkey had a beef with Panama a number of years ago. Cayman Islands, by the way, imaging. If you're running a fund, that's one. I mean, you don't have to run a fund there. If you're running a fund, that's what a lot of people expect. Okay, you want to have a good image. If you're selling products on Amazon, if you're selling cat doormats, is anybody like, oh, this was sold to me by a Belize company? Probably not. But again, the issue of not being in Belize is a banking issue. Where's your money going to be sent? Sometimes the best structure is a multi-part structure, and that especially becomes true when you have staff around the world, where you need staffing companies to pay them. Sometimes you can use things like EORs like deal, to pay them. It's expensive. I think it takes away some of the flexibility that you might want as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you want a staffing company. Sometimes you want payment companies just to receive payments and then move it out. Sometimes there's a markup. Sometimes they're not. So like you want to consider the broad picture. A Belize company that has some kind of local UK structure with a transfer pricing agreement and your customers in the UK, could work. Whereas without the UK structure, you want to be only in the British the British Virgin Islands. The mistake people make is choosing too low of a maintenance company when they have maintenance. Obviously, if you're a fund manager, you shouldn't go to some disreputable jurisdiction. But you want to make sure you're not disreputable to Amazon or to people paying you or to your customers or whatever. Sometimes you want multiple parts of the structure. But even then, there's people who say, just put a U.S. piece in the structure. U.S. structures are becoming more complicated to manage. I'll tell you this, we're trying to be more and more offshore. Because, we can pay zero at the corporate level either way. Obviously, we pay wherever we have, teams and stuff like that. But it's paperwork, it's requirements, and there's risks of being in places like the U.S., in my opinion. And so I think what increasingly you want to do is you want to have a good corporate top, company structure. Don't rely on you just set up some trash company in Belize. Oh, you don't even need to worry about it. The U.S. company will handle the heavy lifting. I think there's a number of potential risks to that. And even if I want to be a little bit more conspiratorial, look at what they're doing with TikTok or other companies where the U.S. is like, we don't want companies involved here or involved there. Maybe one day the place you're incorporated is on the list, or there's some kind of restrictions. And it's not just the U.S., as I said, Turkey and all the way down. Belize, we don't like this one, we don't like that one. So that's kind of my thought process. The answer is there's no perfect company. There's no perfect place. And again, if you want to live in Dubai, then that's probably where you should set up your company. And we help people do that too. But I just think you should be aware of all the different options. If you want us to help you figure this out, you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. If you make $500,000 a year or more, if you have $1 million or more in the bank, the liquid assets, if you have either one of those, we can help you. And we will figure out 31 different tax-friendly countries you can move to. We've got, I think, about 17 different offshore jurisdictions that we have some familiarity with, some more than others. But there's an avatar for every one of them. If you go to the guy in the Marshall Islands, hammer, meet, nail. The solution for everything is the Marshall Islands. And we've talked, years ago when I was talking to onboarding clients, you'd hear someone come back, a year later, I got my company in Hong Kong, but now I can't set up credit card payments. And I paid $300,000 in tax because I couldn't figure this out. You don't want that to be you. So go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We could really go into this. We could spend hours talking about every single permutation because that's the reality. It's bespoke to you. I've looked at, again, some of these holding company jurisdictions just for having stocks. There's no active business. That works. But for my active business, people from all around the world, I need a place that has a good banking profile. I need staffing companies. And so that's the kind of stuff you need to figure out. Any business that's global probably needs some transfer pricing. We have the network of vendors all around the world. We have in-house expertise to help you put all those puzzle pieces together so that you don't just get the Marshall Islands piece or the BVI piece or the UAE piece, but you get all the different countries working well together.